Hello everyone. Good morning to all our esteemed guests. Welcome to the BIPSS Dhaka Tribune Roundtable titled Changing Nature of Conflict, Fighting Hybrid War in the 21st Century. The moderators for today are Major General A.N.M. Muniruzzaman, President of BIPSS, and Mr. Zafar Sobhan, Editor of Dhaka Tribune. Our speaker for this roundtable are Dr. Lieutenant General A.T.M. Zahira Alam, Group Captain Dr. Muhammad Zahidul Islam Khan, and Mr. Shafkat Munir. Without further delay, I would like to request the moderators to carry on the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you. And a very good morning and assalamu alaikum to all our esteemed participants and guests. We are about to begin the monthly roundtable on strategic issues that we do together with Dhaka Tribune. And our today's subject is changing nature of conflict, fighting hybrid war in the 21st century. Hybrid war can represent warfare in the 21st century, a new type of direct or indirect confrontation with effects on short-term, medium-term, and long-term consequences, and sometimes impossible to anticipate and comprehend. If you allow me to go a little bit to history, as I see as a student of military science, hybrid war did exist for centuries. What has changed is the articulation and the sophisticated nature of application of hybrid techniques. And I see that the current articulation of hybrid warfare as we know it today was first articulated by General Mattis of the US Army while talking to the Defense Forum in 2005. Later, together with Frank Hoffman, General Mattis wrote an article in 2005 articulating the concept of hybrid warfare. But it is Hoffman who elaborated the concept in a monograph in 2007, where he says that hybrid war incorporates a range of different modes of warfare, including conventional capabilities, irregular tactics and formations, terrorist tactics, coercion, and a range of criminal disorder. So it's a wide range of techniques that one can apply while talking about hybrid warfare. And it's a combination of activities such as disinformation, economic manipulation, use of proxies and insurgents, diplomatic pressure, military action, legal action, and the menu is long. So therefore, hybrid warfare is also a complex warfare. Sometimes it is referred to as irregular or non-state actors with advanced military capabilities, and the best example that one can cite is the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war, where Hezbollah, as a non-state or a semi-state, acted with all capabilities and tools of hybrid warfare. What has changed now is that cyber and IT techniques and capabilities has given us enhanced capacities to do things that was not possible in the pre-IT world. In many ways, hybrid war operates below the threshold of warfare. So it's a pre-threshold warfare where kinetic warfare does not begin. So you suppress the enemy without probably applying kinetic operations or hard military options. And it is best articulated by the concept given out by Sun Tzu that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And that is exactly what hybrid warfare does. In other words, it continues where politics ends or politics slows down, and in the words of Clausewitz, war is nothing more than the continuation of politics by other means. So it's a fine combination of art and science, of politics and military power, non-military power, irregular power, and a fine blend of all the techniques that are available in our hands. Some have also called it the 5G warfare, where all kinds of non-kinetic military actions, social engineering, disinformation and misinformations, cyber attacks, and these days enhanced with AI and autonomous systems. So we are truly entering a world where fighting is becoming too sophisticated and complex. It is no longer the business of the military alone, but a wide range of actors play a bigger role in fighting a hybrid warfare. And this is exactly the way warfare probably would be fought in the future, with more sophistication, more techniques, and more actors acting in a space where everybody's involved. So we've got an excellent panel of our speakers today who have tremendous experience on this subject. So I will, without delay, hand over to the first speaker, Lieutenant General ATM Zahirul Alam, who will introduce us to the concept of hybrid warfare. Zahir, you have the floor.
Thank you, General Munir. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In fact, the moderator said it all, really. And this is a topic which has been in currency for for quite some time now. And as you see that many of the things that the moderator said, I think will be repeated by some of us here who will be deliberating on the subject. I hope that you will pardon those repetitions, because it will be difficult for me to really change my script at this point of time. I would like to begin with two quotes from Karl von Clausewitz, the famous Prussian general and one of the most eminent military thinkers and strategists of all times. One has already been said by him: war is nothing but the continuation of politics by other means. The other one is, every age has its own kind of war, its own limiting conditions, and its own peculiar preconceptions. Simplistically speaking, hybrid warfare is a form of warfare which entails an interplay or fusion of conventional and unconventional instruments of power, means and methods used in various degrees, along with tools of subversion to achieve its ends and objectives. These instruments and tools are blended in a synchronized manner to exploit the vulnerabilities of an antagonist and achieve synergistic effects. Is it a new form of warfare? As already said by the moderator, it isn't. A survey of military history would show that such warfare is as old as warfare itself. Nevertheless, it has gained significant currency and relevance in recent years as states are seen to employ non-state actors, often armed with sophistication, weapon and technology, information technology, etc., to subdue their adversaries during, or more importantly, in the absence of a direct armed conflict. Two important developments or events in the contemporary era brought hybrid warfare to the fore in policy debates. The first one is, as already told by him, Frank Hoffman, a former US Marine and a defense scholar, in his writing in 2007 proposed, maybe possibly has coined this word also for the first time, hybrid warfare as a theory of military strategy which employs political warfare and blends conventional warfare, irregular warfare, and cyber warfare with other influencing methods such as fake news, diplomacy, lawfare, and foreign electoral intervention. Around that time, the former US Army Chief General W. Casey Jr. talked of a new type of war, a hybrid of irregular warfare and conventional warfare, which, according to him, would become increasingly common in the future. The second development was annexation of Crimea by Russia, wherein, as accused by the West, Russia achieves its objectives by virtue of conflating deniable special forces, local armed actors, economic clout, disinformation, and exploitation of socio-political polarization in Crimea. According to NATO, hybrid threats combine military and non-military as well as covert and overt means, including disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressure, deployment of irregular arms groups as proxies, and use of regular forces. Hybrid methods are used to blur the line between war and peace and attempt to sow doubt in the minds of target population. By combining kinetic operations with subversive efforts, the aggressor intends to avoid attribution or retribution. An article published in Global Security Review titled, "What is Hybrid Warfare?" compares the notion to the Russian concept of non-linear warfare, which it defines as the deployment of conventional and irregular military forces in conjunction with psychological, economic, political, energy, and cyber assaults. The hybrid operation in this format is backed by the implicit threat of tactical or even strategic nuclear deployment in order to cow down governments and influence global public opinion. The US Army defines hybrid warfare or threat as the diverse and dynamic combination of regular forces, irregular forces, criminal elements, or a combination of these forces and elements all unified to achieve mutually benefiting effects. The European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats contends that hybrid threats are methods and activities that are targeted towards vulnerabilities of the opponent, where the range of methods and activities are wide and vast. The political warfare, as referred to by Frank Hoffman, commonly refers to war being employed to achieve national objectives in a way that falls short of physical conflict or total warfare. Such warfare is conducted in the gray zone of conflict, meaning operations may not clearly cross the threshold of war, as has been already said by our moderator. This is done by exploiting the ambiguity of international law, ambiguity of actions and attributions, or because the impact of the activities does not justify a full response by international community or international institutions. Because hybrid warfare, as deliberated often, takes place below the traditional threshold of war, what takes the center stage is the role of the civilians, how they think and act. Hence, the antagonist states need a convincing narrative to ensure support of its home population. At the same time, she needs to craft and execute a propaganda campaign to create wage or distrust in the adversary state between people and between people and the state, and also in support of other states and their people and the global community. Hence, hybrid warfare has 4 battlefields, namely conventional battlefield, the indigenous population of the conflict zone, the home population, and the international community. How do a state or states counter hybrid threats? To counter hybrid threats, hard power is often insufficient. Often the conflict evolves under the radar, and even a rapid response turns out to be too late. Overwhelming force is insufficient deterrent. Even many advanced militaries lack the flexibility to shift tactics, priorities, and objectives consistently or constantly, as the scenario, to commensurate the scenario and developments that require multiple responses. Vast canvas, multiple lines of operations, military, intelligence, diplomatic, political, economic, counter-propaganda and cyber, information, counter-irregular force and dissident population, counter-terrorism, counter-criminals and transnational crimes, etc., complicate and make the response very, very complex. Great harmony as synergy is required amongst and between plethora of state institutions and agencies, which is not easy to achieve. Hence, in most cases, hybrid conflicts become protracted and not easily resolvable. The classic example of hybrid warfare are the ongoing Syrian conflict and the war between Russia and Ukraine, that is now the talk of the town. I will end here reading out what Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had said about hybrid warfare, speaking at the Valdai Discussion Club in November 2014. Quote, "It is an interesting term, but I would apply it above all to the United States and its war strategy. It's truly a hybrid war aimed not so much at defeating the enemy militarily as at changing the regimes in the state that pursue a policy Washington does not like. It is using financial and economic pressure, information attacks, using others on the perimeter of a corresponding state as proxies, and of course information and ideological pressure through external finance, non-governmental organizations. It is not a hybrid process and not what we call war," unquote. So, ladies and gentlemen, to reiterate the famous quote, so hybrid warfare is one of the current ongoing politics by other means. Thank you. I end here.
Thank you, Zahir. That was an elaborate introduction on the concept of hybrid warfare. Two key takeaways from here. It is also a multi-domain warfare. You act on multiple domains at one time. And a key takeaway that I see after listening to his presentation, it hits at the hearts and minds of the population. Particularly, it tries to break down the trust that governments have with the people. The social contract between the citizens and the government is the very essence of governance and stability of a state. And that's where it hits, and it breaks down the trust between the governance structures of the state and the trust between the government or the state and the citizens. We'll have further elaboration of many of these concepts by our next speakers, and I now hand over the floor to Shafkat.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see everyone. This is our last event of 2022, so it's wonderful to see a full house here to talk about a very important subject. I would preface my remarks by saying that when we talk about hybrid war, it should not be seen as an abstract concept only applicable in Europe and in other continents. Hybrid war is a reality of our present generation of warfare, and it is as applicable to our region as anywhere else. So as a country, as a military, we should also be studying this concept very carefully because it has applicability for us. The moderator and our previous speaker, General Zahir, has already pointed out about the conceptual ideas about hybrid war. I want to delve a bit into some of the tools and techniques. The key question before us is that can there be war without any direct or combat or physical confrontation taking place? Over the years, I think what we have seen is the risk or the hazard or the cost of all-out warfare is so high that many countries find it more conducive to fight war just below the threshold. And that's where the concept of hybrid war becomes so important. It also remains very closely linked to the philosophy of war as well, and we will have to constantly go back to our two favorite military theorist or strategist Herr von Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, because we cannot talk about war without constantly referring to them. If we go back to Sun Tzu's concept about supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, hybrid attacks essentially try to achieve that, because they're marked by a lot of vagueness. The country that is targeted is either not able to detect a hybrid attack or not able to attribute it to a state that might be perpetrating or sponsoring it, and that's the whole mantra of what hybrid warfare is. We can break hybrid warfare into several subparts, and they are political, economic, military, civil, or in the information domain. We often hear a lot about the use of disinformation and influence operations as a tool of hybrid war, but there are other tools as well which I want to lay before you. Perhaps the most important tool that we see attributed to hybrid warfare is political warfare, and it refers to the employment of military, intelligence, diplomatic, financial, and other means, just short of conventional war, to achieve national objectives. In this case, it can include overt operations like public broadcasting and covert operations like psychological warfare and support to underground resistance groups. Some of the key characteristics of political warfare that scholars have now presented before us are employment of all elements of national power, relying heavily on unattributable forces and means, staying below the legal threshold of an open armed conflict, extending traditional conflict and achieving effects at lower costs, exploiting shared ethnic or religious bonds or other internal schisms within society, and therefore, for the state which is the target of such political warfare, it requires a heavy investment into various types of resources, including intelligence resources, in order to be able to detect that political warfare is being perpetrated against them. One example that often comes up quite a lot in terms of political warfare is interference in electoral processes, and that has been happening quite a lot across the world in many places, where the adversary can use techniques from campaigning through the media and social networks to securing financial resources for a particular political group to influence the outcome of an election in a direction that favors the adversary's political interests. So I think these are things that we need to study and analyze very carefully, because it has, as I said at the beginning, it has applicability even for countries like ours or in a region like ours. So it is not an abstract concept which we will only hear about from Europe. A hybrid war can be applicable for us as well. Some scholars also argue that the use of unmanned drones can be a tool of hybrid war as well, as long as there is deniability. The next domain that we look at is the economic domain, where hybrid war is pursued through media campaigns, social media campaigns, sanctions, and we see that financial influence is brought about to where an adversary can make investments, conclude unfavorable deals in terms of to undermine the other country's energy security and so on, or offer loans that make a country vulnerable in the long term to political pressure. So in a way, the employment of economic tools is very much a part of hybrid warfare as well. And this is still an ongoing debate in scholarship on hybrid warfare, whether economic coercion can be a tool, but many scholars have already identified that yes, economic coercion, or what we call in certain, what has been termed in certain places as predatory economics, can also be a tool of hybrid warfare. If population is the center of gravity in any war, then we see that civilian populations are central to any designing of hybrid warfare tools. Because civilian populations are central to the conflict as sources for socio-political vulnerabilities in a society and as targets for non-military threats and attacks using mis- or disinformation campaigns. We see that populations are targeted and massaged into being potential weapons within the state or society in question. We are all quite familiar with the term fifth column. I think it's a popular term that has been used for centuries. Hybrid warfare essentially targets the population into turning them into potential fifth columns. And this is a particular tool within the wider toolkit of hybrid warfare, which we will see probably being employed quite a lot in the coming days. As many of you may be aware, BIPSS has done quite a bit of work on disinformation and fake news, and we are about to embark on a major project in that regard. And disinformation and fake news perhaps is now the most potent and powerful tool of hybrid warfare that is being employed, where an adversary can create a parallel reality and use falsehoods to fuel social fragmentation, disorient the public, and make it difficult for the government to seek public approval to carry out many of its policies. So in a way, an alternative reality is presented to the public through means of disinformation, fake news, and in some cases influence operations, where the public start believing the fake news as reality. And this has been employed in many countries, and I think it's important for us to understand that in order to be able to protect us from the employment of hybrid tactics, we have to be first aware about disinformation. As the chair said at the beginning, as we get more integrated into cyberspace, as we have artificial intelligence entering our lives, and then we also have the whole idea of augmented reality or AR, metaverse, and so on, and a greater integration with cyberspace, hybrid threats will become more potent and more real. Because hybrid threats blend the lethality of state conflict with the fanatical and protected fervor of irregular warfare. In such conflicts in future, adversaries, state-sponsored groups, or self-funded actors could potentially exploit access to modern military capabilities, including encrypted command systems, man-portable surface-to-air missiles, and other modern lethal systems, as well as promote protracted insurgencies that employ other irregular tactics. We could potentially see states blending high-tech capabilities such as anti-satellite weapons with cyber warfare. So I think there is a interesting correlation which is emerging between what we traditionally call information warfare, cyber warfare, and some of the new hybrid tactics. So, and often a mistake I think we make in Bangladesh is that we are not as cyber vulnerable as some of the advanced countries are. But the reality is we are as cyber vulnerable as any advanced country, because our integration is also quite significant, and the new systems and infrastructure that we are developing are going to be more cyber vulnerable than ever before. So this is something, for example, we have the metro rail coming up, which is essentially going to depend on cyberspace for its smooth operation. So I think this is something we have to keep in mind, that our cyber defenses have to be strong, and unless our cyber defenses are strong, we have a vulnerability when it comes to hybrid attacks. I'll just start wrapping up here. So just to recap what I said, that we are looking at multiple domains and tools of hybrid warfare that can be employed. Our cohesion as a society, we are going to be more susceptible to hybrid attacks. Because ultimately what an adversary tries to do by employing hybrid tactics is essentially exploit the schisms that exist within a particular society. And whether we call it political warfare, whether by means of disinformation, cyber tactics, or in some cases economic exploitation, it is ultimately the exploitations of the differences and schisms and lack of cohesion which exists within society. So these are some thoughts. I'd come back again during Q&A, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Shafqat, thank you. You did explain very well how the multi-domain concept works. And states like Bangladesh or any other state is extremely vulnerable to all the tools that are being employed in hybrid warfare. You also very correctly mentioned that in cyberspace, we are as vulnerable as any other advanced country in the world. As long as you're linked to the international cyber highway, you become all the more vulnerable. Our banking system, our water distribution, the electricity that we are using here, our telephone system, everything that we do today is cyber dependent. So therefore, our cyber defenses have to be adequate. I'm not too sure whether we have the current defenses for our cyber capabilities in Bangladesh or not. So this is an awareness that needs to be built. Our next speaker is Group Captain Zaid. Zaid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, sir. Distinguished moderators, esteemed fellow panelists, and learned audience, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning. It's always very rewarding to participate in any BIPSS event, which I think by now has established itself as a dynamic hub of intellectual discourse, critical thinking, and also allowing the academics, professionals, and other interested parties to talk and interact on contemporary issues. I hope today's session will be also as exciting as it used to be. The problem of being the last, not the problem, actually the advantage of being the last speaker is that you can either summarize what all have been said, or also or infuse something new which has not been already said. So I'll choose the later. We have heard Frank Hoffman. As a Air Command Staff College graduate, I had the opportunity of listening to him. And also a couple of days back, he was in another webinar talking about his own concept of hybrid warfare. And we've also heard about Sun Tzu with Clausewitz and everything that relates to their thoughts on hybrid warfare and how it is relatable to what we have defined as hybrid warfare. It seems that hybrid warfare, the concept is all-embracing. That is problematic for a researcher. Researchers needs to sort of scale it down and sort of bite and put the conceptual thinking in a perspective. So one good way of doing it is to look into the Clausewitz trinity of war and then explain it from there so that the theorization of hybrid warfare becomes more relevant and understandable. So in the trinity of war, there are three different forces. Clausewitz talks about three different forces. One which generates in the realm of people is primordial violence, hatred, and enmity, which others have defined as irrational force. The next one is the fog and friction of war, which originates in the realm of military and the commander. And this is called non-rational force. And the third is war's subjugation to policy, which most of us have articulated as war is an instrument of policy, and reason. And that is the rational force. So what has happened, I mean, if you see hybrid warfare through these lenses, then we find that the irrational forces has dominated over non-rational and rational forces, because we're talking about non-state actors, fanatic fighting styles, circumventing the norms of war or laws of armed conflict in hybrid warfare. That has happened, and that is why that is how, if we see the hybrid warfare, then it becomes conceptually understandable, much more graspable. So relevant to this, what is more pertinent is to also pinpoint what exactly has changed in the 21st century warfare. And with a very brief comment on this, I will shift into the main another critical area, that how to counter hybrid warfare. The first thing that has changed in the 21st century warfare, that states, particularly those who are nuclear armed states, want to operate below the threshold of direct conflict. So warfare has become increasingly indirect. And this is evidenced by the statistics which is published by the UCPD and also PRIO, that there is a decline in interstate war, tremendous decline in interstate war, but there is an exponential increase in internationalized internal war, which you can also call civil wars. So proxy forces, non-state actors, motivated, funded, and supported by external entities, have become the main actors. And the second thing that has changed is that the non-military means of achieving political and strategic goals has grown. And in many cases, they have exceeded the power of force, of weapon, in their effectiveness. And we have heard talk about cyberspace. It is a particular example where it's a non-kinetic operations, which gives a certain advantage to certain nations. Third, war in this age is aimed more on creating cognitive effects as opposed to physical destructions. The aim is to change the mind of the people, and that is exactly what has changed. So amidst such profound changes, hybrid warfare has emerged as a tool to pursue strategic ends with a degree of force, but not such an overt use of coercion that it would cross the threshold of conventional justification for war. So with these small insights about the concept and changes, let me now focus on how to fight hybrid warfare. Now, we have already established pretty much that hybrid warfare cannot be fought in silos. It requires integration of all elements of national power for offensive and defensive operation. The aim is to develop an asymmetric edge and build capacities to fight ambiguous and amorphous adversaries by synergistic application of intelligence, information, cyber, electronic, conventional and unconventional means. We also have to remember that hybrid warfare can be a prolonged conflict. It undermines institutions, and we've also heard that its target is to affect the societal cohesion, and it could eventually escalate into conventional war. The domains of hybrid war can spill over to kinetic and non-kinetic, traditional, non-traditional, and contact and non-contact warfare. This is the reason why most countries have placed hybrid warfare capabilities under a centralized military control with political supervision. Moreover, since it deals with external adversaries, it falls in the ambit of military engagement for offensive and defensive operation. Creation of military structure to fight hybrid war assumes greater significance, especially when hybrid warfare campaign tends to be long-term, reflecting that the states are living in a period of persistent competition, confrontation, and conflict. So the starting point of building the capacity or fighting hybrid warfare is to develop a doctrine. Unfortunately, we do not have one. So it is perhaps pertinent to look at the doctrine of some of our neighbors, and I have some insights. I'll share some insights from the Indian military doctrine. India has both joint warfare doctrine and service doctrines like the Air Force doctrine and the land warfare doctrine. So I'll just, for the paucity of time, I'll only highlight three aspects. First, these doctrines recognize that non-contact and hybrid domains of conflict are integral part of India's conventional and sub-conventional operations. Accordingly, the doctrine stipulates that when India prosecutes a conventional war, and I quote, appropriate simultaneous response to hybrid and non-contact warfare will be ensured in all dimensions, at all stages, and in all sectors of conflict, unquote. Interestingly, this military doctrine also mentions about coercive diplomacy, defense diplomacy, cyber power projection, perception management through information operations, and identifies those as some of the key elements to conduct India's hybrid warfare campaign, and suggesting better integration of these elements to strengthen its military instrument of power. The second element in the doctrine is that it posits that the non-contact and hybrid warfare prosecuted by India could be non-declaratory and non-attributable, something that Shafkat has already touched, that use of drones gives a plausible deniability. India's joint doctrine also states strategic surgical strikes as a pragmatic and proactive strategy to respond against terror provocation. So such doctrinal legitimation arguably allows the military to operate below the threshold of open hostility, blurring the lines between peace and war, and circumvent the traditional norms of warfare, all of which, as we have already established, is the characteristics of hybrid warfare. So it goes back to what Shafkat was telling, that we should not consider hybrid warfare as a concept which is not applicable in our context. And we'll soon find out why when I talk about a little more about the Bangladesh context. So something about the other things about the structure of how to fight hybrid warfare can be also referred from the Indian doctrine. They have defense cyber agencies, defense space agencies, and special operation divisions, and often referred as the triad. This is bolstering India's hybrid warfare capacities, and for offensive operations, the cyber and space elements plans the operation, and the special operation forces conduct the hybrid warfare. The doctrine also goes on suggesting that adequate capabilities will be developed to dominate the information domain, to deal with external and internal security challenges in coordination with earmarked services and agencies. So these insights from the Indian military doctrine provide some idea which we can extrapolate, customize in our context, taking into consideration of our vulnerabilities, national priorities, and interest to develop our own doctrine of fighting hybrid warfare. In terms of our vulnerabilities, I'm sure most of you will agree with me that our diplomatic instrument of power needs to be strengthened with credible deterrence. Diplomacy without inadequate deterrence is like a velvet glove without an iron fist. Now, developing credible deterrence is not just a function of acquiring new asset, but also a closer coordination, integration, and alignment of other instruments of national power. Second, we're also vulnerable to external and internal support and influence of non-state actors, particularly those engaged in violent extremism. One key non-coercive element means to combat such violent extremism and radicalism is to create a pragmatic and well-reasoned counter-narrative, something that the President was actually saying in one of his recent interviews, if I'm not wrong, in a newspaper. Several counter-narrative campaigns such as Average Muhammad targeting the Somalian youth, Exit USA targeting the far-right extremists in the United States, Harkatul Talim targeting the Taliban extremist narratives promoted in Pakistan have been reportedly fostered open conversation and provided a better understanding of the target audiences, promoting community cohesions. Third, our vulnerability also lies on inadequate and divergent perception of what constitutes our national security concern. Despite being the second most ethnically homogeneous country after the two Koreas, our society remains bitterly divided along the political lines. Such division creates space for conducting hybrid warfare against Bangladesh by any potential adversaries. Addressing such vulnerability would require an integrated and synchronized approach towards national security issues, and more importantly, creating echo chambers in the cyberspace and the information domain to enlighten and align the larger population about the key national security issues. So what have we done so far in terms of fighting hybrid warfare? Well, in short, not much, but there are some encouraging signs. There is no explicit mention of hybrid warfare in our defense policy of 2018. It, however, directs the defense forces to be capable of conducting conventional and unconventional war, including cyber warfare. This is inclusive in our defense policy. The policy also directs the armed forces to develop capabilities of information warfare, control the electromagnetic spectrum in order to function effectively under information and communication technology-based threats. Now, such mentions and guidance on cyber, electromagnetic, and information domain, which essentially are integral part of hybrid warfare, provide scopes for capacity building. However, the guidance of our defense policy focuses only on the defensive cyber actions, ignoring the offensive potentials of cyber warfare. The 2014 cyber security strategy, which was promulgated through a government gadget, also focuses on areas like legal measures offshoot of this cybersecurity strategy is the DSA. Technical and procedural measures and organizational structures for cybersecurity. The strategy is geared towards building awareness, formulating legal regimes, and defensive measures to protect national data centers and other facilities. In contrast, in more recent times, Bangladesh Armed Forces Cybersecurity Policy 2020 calls for creating a dedicated cyber force and to promulgate a declarative policy for fighting hybrid warfare. This will facilitate the defense forces to acquire assets and also prepare their doctrine. As per this policy, a cyber force should be formed to support cyber warfare, counter cyber warfare, and cyber security issues. This force may also combat cyber terrorism to establish cyber power projection. The composition of the force should be a mix of civil and military personnel and grouped into 6 wings like cyber defense, cyber offense, and cyber security coordination tasks. But this is still in a policy level. So not much has been done except establishing few directorates in the service headquarter levels for cyber warfare. So Bangladesh's progress in cybersecurity is encouraging to some extent, and according to the 2020 Global Cybersecurity Index, which measures the commitment of countries to cybersecurity, Bangladesh ranked 53rd out of 182 countries and 11th in the Asia-Pacific region. If we can translate our aspirational policy into capacities, Bangladesh can have an edge on the cyber warfare domain, and I fully agree with Shafkat that emerging facilities like the metro rail and others, which will be key nodal points for cyber, and vulnerability will increase for cyber attacks. Another encouraging and affordable tool to develop our hybrid warfare fighting capacity would be acquiring combat drones, associated technologies. Recently, the military has already acquired some off-the-shelf combat drones, and several projects to produce such drones through technology transfer is in hand. However, the current steps to develop our kinetic and non-kinetic capability to prosecute or counter hybrid warfare is very meager and lacks integration. As highlighted before, combating hybrid warfare threats requires whole of government response that combines all national instruments of power. Our strategy to counter or retaliate hybrid warfare threats should be systemic and well integrated. I do have a few more points on how we should build a strategy for fighting for countering the hybrid warfare, which I can discuss during the question and answer session. But suffice to say that this should have 3 elements: is respond, deter, and defend. We can elaborate on these in the subsequent Q&As. But to conclude, fighting a hybrid war requires research, information, communications, and integration of resources under a defined centralized authority. If such complex warfare lacks direction, control, and focus, it can be chaotic, and if not dealt professionally, it can become a major challenge to the national security. Combating hybrid warfare also requires a degree of politico-military coordination, because such warfare can break out unexpectedly during peacetime. Hybrid operations should have the capabilities to engage with state, society, and infrastructure simultaneously. A synchronized and integrated approach that allows a prudent and inclusive use of the elements of national power is the way forward to fight hybrid war. Thank you.
Thank you, Zayed. Thank you, Zayed. You explained that very well, especially on the tools of countering hybrid threats. And as you can imagine that, like any other country, Bangladesh is vulnerable, and we are falling short of our preparatory works that we need to do in peacetime. The lines between peace and war is blurred here in cyber warfare and also in hybrid warfare. So therefore, we are always in hybrid environment. So it can break out even during peace, and it is very difficult to identify when it has broken out. So those are the vulnerabilities that we live in. But with that, we will now open the floor for your questions and comments. I will have first Ambassador Shamim, then sir, I will come to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you so much for inviting me to this event. I've heard with a lot of interest the presentation so far from the panel. So I don't claim much knowledge, and in fact I don't know much about hybrid war or cyber war. I have heard a great deal. My question would be more out of curiosity. I mean, one is I haven't really heard any concrete example of from any of the presentations of an intense hybrid war between two state actors, like you would refer to many intense battles in military history, like the Battle of Alamein or the Indo-Pak Wars. So can you cite one or two cases where there have been intense hybrid war between two states, currently or in the past, for my better understanding? And another sort of reference to our metro system, which will be inaugurated possibly on the 28th, running the risk of being affected by hybrid war. It really sort of stoked my curious mind, and it was possibly Mr. Shafkat who referred to that, and I would like to have the benefit of some elaboration from it. And another thing is, in case of an intense hybrid war, I mean, what did you expect between two state actors? What did you expect the population to do? I mean, like in case of a conventional war, I mean, when there's an air attack, we should run to the trenches, you know. And another thing is, I would like to hear from any of the panelists, how can a hybrid war get more intense in an inter-state conflict in an event where the conflict is basically triggered by the acts of the government of the day? Thank you.
Thank you for excellent questions. And in addition to what you said that you don't understand the warfare, every single citizen is a hybrid warrior. You as a diplomat, you are as much a warrior as I am as a former soldier. One of the biggest vulnerability in cyberspace that is increasingly coming to Bangladesh is our nuclear power plant that we are building in Rupur. So we better gear up our abilities and capabilities, because that is extremely cyber vulnerable. So we have, as one of our panelists just reminded me, that we have already had a physical attack on our central bank from the cyberspace. So you can imagine how vulnerable we have in fact become. And we will now go to you, sir, for your comments.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be back here again. I would make some comments, yes, and the idea of making these comments would be to make the discussions a little hybrid. I mean, we have a very intensely military or largely military panel, largely military panel, and this would be civilian input into the discussions, I hope. But all three of them, Zahir, Shafkat, and Zahid, have made presented excellent papers. I would like to sort of react to, starting from what you began, General Munir, with your remarks with regard to 5G. Now, 5G, of course, refers to the fifth generation of warfare, and this is I think the expression was first coined, or supposed to have been coined by Robert Steele in a talk in 2003, I think, though it was contested. But I'd like to sort of discuss a little on how so you need to give me a few minutes as to how it evolved up to fifth generation from the beginning. But before that, to respond a little to Shamim, the Hezbollah war that Munir had referred to was indeed a hybrid war, and in fact, Arkela and Ronfeld we made a lot of reference to, of course, Frank Hoffman. Frank Hoffman's key piece here is network-centric warfare, some cautionary thoughts. Yeah. That was his article. But Arkela and Ronfeld drew from the Hezbollah method of warfighting, which comprised small, dispersed groups who communicate, coordinate, and conduct their campaigns in an interneted manner without precise central command. Yeah. So that was the beginning of what they called networks and cyber war, and in fact the piece was called "Networks and Works and Cyber War are coming to the world," or something like that. Now, the evolution of the 5 generations. The first generation, of course, as you would expect, would be the ancient and medieval Roman legions, I mean, who came in cohorts and lines and columns, and they had their weaponry designed in consonance with the evolution of the sort of Roman culture. Apart from the arrows, of course, they had the long spears, which were called the pilums. The spears were about 7 feet long, so that it bent on impact, you see, so that it was an intelligent spear, because the other party could not throw it back at you.
Smart spear.
Smart spear. Smart spear. So they developed the smart spear. So war was straightforward, orderly. It was a straightforward, orderly means of waging war. Now, this lasted actually almost through from the ancient time through 1648 to the First Great War. 1648 is what created, as we know, the state system in Europe. Yes. But prior to that, you know, these armies comprised these religious groups and all that sort of thing. And when the 30 Years' War was fought, the states began to emerge, nation states began to emerge. We had these sort of uniformed soldiers belonging to the state. Fighting for the nation state. So that was the beginning of the first generation, which blended into the second generation of warfare, which is roughly around, say, 1860 to the First Great War. Now, the second generation, the war was still, battle fighting was still linear. You use muskets, and the Lanchester model came into being. Lanchester model is a mathematical formulae. Very crudely put, it's that numbers being equal, superior firepower wins, you see. And then you have mathematical models built on that. You see distance, aimed or non-aimed firing, etc. So basically, you had longer range. It involved longer range, greater accuracy, and faster rate of fire. Then you had the third generation, which was non-linear. You went behind the enemy lines, because by that time aircraft had come into existence. So you were able to go behind the airlines and enemy and use sort of long-range shelling and air force to do that. What comes to mind in this generation is the Blitzkrieg, of course, the famous Blitzkrieg, which was actually developed by, as you know, the Germans. But Heinz Guderian, I think his work was called Achtung Panzer. He was a signals officer who took a lot of interest in tanks. He did a lot of study on tank antics. So what he developed, the Blitzkrieg, was combination of tank, aircraft, and radio. And a combination of the three, and speed and maneuverability were the sort of stratagem. In other words, the idea was sort of overcome technological disadvantage through clever strategy, you see. So that was the idea. Then the fourth generation, which is the current decentralized form of warfare. We spoke about this, of course, non-state actors, both kinetic and non-kinetic actions. Now, interestingly, fourth generation, you see, it was said, it has been said, that even during the Punic Wars, they had something like a fourth generation, which led Pliny the Elder to famously say, ex Africa semper ubiquis nova, out of Africa will always emerge something new, you see, because they had these, both a combination of civilians and military fighting the war. Fifth generation, what you referred to, General Munir, is when actually Robert Steele coined that expression. He was challenging that this was 2003, that it was too soon. I mean, too soon perhaps. Maybe it was then, but no longer. But this had to do with futuristic, mostly non-kinetic actions such as social engineering, disinformation campaigns, use of IT, AI, artificial intelligence, weaponry, gray zone warfare, such as psychological information warfare, cyber warfare, omnipresent battle space. I mean, battleground becomes battle space, and all domains are brought into action. Now, you see, eventually, what happens is that they said that any sufficiency developed technology is, in fact, becomes a bit like magic. But the thesis, I mean, you all made a mention of Sun Tzu, and his point was all warfare is based on deception, and this was so many thousand years ago. So my thesis is basically we are going back to the same thing. Yes. I mean, to deceiving the enemy and using the human intelligence in order to be able to do so. So the ultimate thesis being that it's man's ingenuity. It's still the general, still the leader, still the man who has to decide when to pull the trigger, set the AI in motion, or to press the button. So the ingenuity of the human mind is important, and obviously, so it was rightly said that man's reach should exceed his grasp. What else are the heavens for? I thank you.
Thank you. Excellent points and a lot of food for thought. But the only issue here are two that I take from your deliberations, is that with increased autonomous platforms, the man's ingenuity probably may be in decline at some times, because autonomous platforms can take autonomous decisions now. The other point is, both Shafkat and Zaid did mention that we are operating in pre-threshold environment. So one of the biggest difficulties in pre-threshold environment is that we are without any legal cover. The laws of war, we have a colleague from ICRC, he can explain it better than me, that the laws of armed conflict do not apply here. So we are operating in a vacuum while all forms of actions are not covered by any international law or legal system. And that's something that worries everybody. So I now go to our former Foreign Secretary, Tawhid Hussain.
Thank you. We have had quite an elaborate and very enlightening discussion on the mostly theoretical aspect, but also some applicability of those. Shanghai actually wanted to know some examples. Well, people could disagree with me, but the Bangladesh Liberation War, at least till September, was a hybrid war and non-attributable. India never agreed that it's helping in arming or doing things till at least July. And the basic intention was that there will be a frontal conflict someday, but to weaken and disorient the enemy before that. And they did it very successfully, and the freedom fighters were instrumental in the ultimate victory. About the going back, Hassan Sabbah, the name strikes, 11th century. The Hashishis, they introduced assassination. The name came from there. Assassination as a political instrument.
Yeah.
And they reached up to the bedroom of Salahuddin Ayyubi. They could do that. There was a knife planted on his pillow. They could have killed him, meaning that they could have killed him, putting pressure on him to concede certain things. And he succumbed to that. It was hybrid warfare. Bangladesh at this moment is victim of a hybrid warfare. Myanmar has sent in 1 million refugees on us, almost without impunity. They have not paid any price for that. Offering economic gains to others, economic strategic gains to others. They have had very important friends in the guise of China and Russia, to some extent even India, Japan. West also, they are investing there, and they don't want to take, nobody wants to take any action against Myanmar because they have gains to make. So that is another. Cyberspace. You go in and you see much more of the Myanmar's position on the Rohingya issues than the position of the victims in the cyberspace. They are doing it better than us, better than the. We have not done much about it. There is scope for it. We have spoken about it, that there is a lot of scope for us. We have a huge population, and many of them are quite technology savvy. We just have to get that resource to work, to actually dislodge Myanmar on many fronts. We can do that if we just have the right policy. Pushing drugs into Bangladesh.
Sorry?
Drugs.
Okay.
Narcotics.
And the victims of the genocide are being used by the genocidal regime to do it. And projecting the victims as terrorists. So on all these fronts, a cyber warfare or a hybrid warfare is going on. And I don't know how much we are doing to save ourselves, to defend ourselves. Thank you.
Yes, you do point out a very interesting point that crimes and different crime techniques is a hybrid technique. And that's where you're pointing out. Also the fact that we are operating in the gray zone. And in the gray zone, a lot of things are not very clear. We need to identify the threats very explicitly so that you can have countermeasures to meet the threats. The gray zone warfare, as we know it today in the hybrid domain, is a very complex space where things are blurred. That's why it's gray. Where it's difficult to identify the threat and the perpetrators. It is a space where people can almost operate with impunity, as you rightly point out. And those are the vulnerabilities we need to identify. So we have our professor or teacher from Dhaka University, Tanvir.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me the opportunity to speak. A very timely issue in terms of Bangladesh and how it might impact us. I believe acknowledgement of a problem is the first step towards a solution. So looking back at human history, I believe societies, when they have engaged in any kinds of conflict, has always looked for any power asymmetries that they could gain. So once we tried to tame animals, we got the idea of mobility, and then the chariots and everything came about. So this is not a very new phenomenon that we see, just an addition of dimensions. We often tend to be overwhelmed by the novel concept of AI or let's say various other dimensions, but we need to understand that as we modernize and as we tend to add more dimensions to our own lives, so using cyberspace, using AI to augment reality and other stuff, those aspects are always going to be targeted by actors who try to overcome their power asymmetry. We need to understand that generally hybrid warfare or this kind of warfares are, although being termed as non-Trinitarian warfare or non-Clausewitzian warfare, but these are in effect, the recourse to hybrid warfare is in effect a very rational choice. Most often than not, it is a strategy of countries that tend to have a power symmetry that is skewed against them. So if you could win a warfare in a linear conventional war, you would not be approaching hybrid warfare to begin with. And the second reason why countries go to hybrid warfare is the plausible deniability, which I believe we have talked about. And the third reason is a cost-benefit aspect of the strategy to begin with, because that allows you a large degree of influence without having to spend a lot of money in conventional warfare. So I believe understanding that would require us to go back into the Russian concept of Maskoryovka, which initially talked in terms of operational, which later on got into a strategic effect, but now it has been taken into information domain as well. So understanding those concepts would declutter a lot of these issues for us. Approaches to hybrid warfare, regardless of the fact that it is mostly talked about in terms of warfare and a military-led one, but a response to that might be in terms of a more civilian-led approaches. Democracies in general tend to be less powerful in their responses to this because their domestic makeup is divisionary. That is how they are supposed to be. Dissent is something that we cherish in democracy. As such, most democracies, what they do is using a very strong, centralized and effective National Security Council, they tend to deal with national security problems. That is perhaps an institutional mechanism we are still missing in Bangladesh. Approach to that perhaps would lead us to a better understanding that we might respond to that. So in order to understand or in order to respond to these problems, we need to understand that in a two-step model of media or narrative or information warfare, however we want to call it, nodal points in the society, which we call as opinion shapers in society, are important aspects of this hybrid warfare campaign. So once we understand the logistics of the problem, then we would understand that a lot of that could be targeted at their very root without having to recourse to major cost or major escalation in our fields as well. So despite the fact that we talk of hybrid warfare in terms of mostly short-term effects or mostly in tactical aspects, but hybrid warfare strategy is a long-term aspect as well. That's where the gray zone strategy comes in. So countries would over a long period of time try to shape the narratives or understandings or thought process of their opponents or the targeted communities. And that would require a lot of logistical efforts behind the scene in trying to shape the narratives in real time, or in trying to shape narratives of these public opinion shapers through a process of intimidation or using other methods. And that would fall under the purview of a properly functioning counterintelligence operation. So these are not issues that cannot be targeted. Moreover, counter-narrative is in effect and essentially a civilian-led affair. So that is something we need to acknowledge as well, because it requires a large degree of flexibility in terms of how you approach the problem to begin with. And that would require a much more flexible approach to this issue, which I don't think in a technical military affair we would find that to begin with. So engaging both sides of the spectrum, civilian and military, I believe if you understand and if you have a focused way of approaching this issue, Bangladesh can respond to that, regardless of which domain we are fighting, whether it's cyber or information campaign or in the next domain that we add to our lifestyle. So that is how we probably might approach this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanvir. Completely agree with whatever you're saying. One thing we did not talk here today is the very power and the use of data integrity, which is again a very, very vulnerable front of hybrid warfare. With data corruption, you can degrade a nation's capacity to wage war. And that is extremely important today because everything is data dependent. Zahid did mention that safeguarding data centers. So it goes back on not only to saving the data centers, but data creation, data integrity, data expansions, everything is data dependent, data driven. And that is a very, very useful front. But one of the most active ways of doing influence operation, doing information operation, or any sort of manipulation is in the media domain. And that is perhaps one of the biggest spaces in hybrid warfare. So we would like to listen to Aisha Kabir for her comments, because she is the editor of Prathamalo English Web.
Thank you, General Munir. I was just thinking when I was listening to all of the deliberations that as the media, as a media person, I was feeling that as the media, how very vulnerable we are, the media as a whole, to be sucked in knowingly or unknowingly into this hybrid war which exists globally, not only as victims but also as perpetrators. We can be willing or unwilling perpetrators without knowing, simply because of ignorance. So I think it's extremely important. In fact, just today, listening to this, all of your deliberations, I realized just how very important it is for the media people, the members of the media, to be very aware of this hybrid warfare which is all around it. Because we just hear about the terms hybrid war, we know vaguely about it, but I think this requires much more than just awareness, but active understanding, active application in our profession, because we can be unwilling or ignorant participants or perpetrators by just even publishing an seemingly innocuous article or whatever. So I was also wanting to question that, is there any Tanvir was mentioning the need of an institution, a central institution. Do we have, because hybrid warfare is such a thing, as all of you were saying, it's not from today, it's from ancient times, but every day it's growing more and more sophisticated. Every time we meet a challenge or we understand it, something more sophisticated or more technological is coming up, harder and harder to combat. So do we have any institution in Bangladesh, I'm meaning, who keeps up with what is going on in this cyber warfare or hybrid war? What is going on? What are the developments? How can we constantly combat it? How can we keep up with it? Is there any institution that is doing research on this, where on a national level, not just on a private level, so where we in the media or any other institution, where we can also be educated, also be, come to know and come to understand it? Because we don't have workshops like this or roundtables like this every day. So is there any institution where which could help us, particularly as a media person, I'm saying, help us understand this, help us combat it, help us avoid becoming perpetrators or victims of this?
Thank you, Aisha. We'll now go to Rusht for your question or comment.
What Aisha has said, I am also a journalist, though I had been a military officer for a shorter period. Yes, all around the world, the governments are raising hybrid warfare against the journalists, against media. We cannot deny the fact. So we have to face every day these things. And what she says and suggested about some sort of institutions that can educate us about something, how we are going to achieve it, especially in Bangladesh, because in Bangladesh everything is termed in political sense, and said whether you are with us or you are against us. So there, in the media also there are problems, so we cannot just achieve it in that way. However, we have what Shafkat and General Johir and Group Captain Jahid has referred about few specialists. I will refer Chanakya, probably he is one of the veterans. He said that instigation of treachery in the target country, nation or enemy camp is a very well thought means to raise hybrid warfare or non-conventional warfare. And Bangladesh probably is a say perfect example of that, what already few of them have mentioned. I will ask few questions to Shafkat. Shafkat has mentioned about loan or economic coercion by some powers, and I will ask that, do you think these mega projects of something, then connectivity of something, those who are going on in our region or around the world, you can term this as the means of hybrid warfare? And to General Johir, sir, do you think, sir, that hybrid warfare once fought among the countries, that it may instigate or welcome full-scale war in a bigger perspective, or even nuclear war, what we are anticipating for Russia and Ukraine war? Is there any possibility, or actually this hybrid warfare instigating this, say for Iran, for their proxies, they are raising hybrid warfare through Hezbollah, Hamas in Lebanon, in Israel, and Gaza Strip, in Iraq, in Syria? Do you think the other countries may retaliate? As we have seen recently, the Saudi minister in Abu Dhabi or in Dubai, he commented that we want surety from the world. Otherwise, all bets are off if Iran gets the nuclear weapon. So this is going to be a question for the future. And what Group Captain Jahid has mentioned about our Bangladeshi society. Yes, I wrote a book in 2003 titled National Security and Armed Forces, where interviews of 23 generals are included. There I mentioned this thing in details, but I would say only that in Bangladesh, 98.7% population are Bengali speaking, Bengali. So we should have better, say, homogeneity, social homogeneity, but we don't have. Due to political reasons, political purposes, we have destroyed it, whether you agree or not. And political vulnerability and absence of social homogeneity, I think, made us most vulnerable, and how to counter it. And what Sir has said and Mr. Tawhid has said that Myanmar is already raising some sort of hybrid warfare against us. How to counter it? If you don't have social homogeneity, you will be always how to counter it means we require a strong defense, we require our strong intelligence system, this and that. How they will counter it? If we have social problems, social vulnerability, political vulnerability. We have observed for years together, not only during this government, during other governments too, that our intelligence organizations are being used mainly for political purposes against the political opponents. So this reduces their capacities, their capabilities. We have fine brand of officers there. They are well trained, but they are 24/7 busy about politics. So if we don't stop it, we cannot achieve this mission. And if we stop it and we can enhance their capacities, we can give them more training, we can bring in some good partners, foreign partners or anyone, then I think it can be achieved. And the last point is that there is one thing, Jahid, Group Captain Jahid, do you think that inciting religious sentiment is a tool of hybrid warfare, especially what we see in Afghanistan, in Iran, in some areas of Pakistan, even in Bangladesh and some other areas of the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question or comment will be from Merlin Boone. He's an instructor at the U.S. Army's Military Academy at West Point and also a doctoral candidate at Princeton University. You have the floor.
Great, thank you, sir, for having me today, and thank you to the distinguished panel for speaking with us. I'd like to make comments in two specific areas. First, I think when we talk about hybrid war, it's important to consider the scope of what we're talking about. So when we talk about hybrid war, it can encompass everything, or it can encompass a specific sector or a region. So I think that's something that we should dedicate more attention to as we try to define and analyze this problem. In tandem with that, I think it's important to identify the effects of these hybrid operations. Otherwise, we're looking at a pretty sprawling problem, and we don't really have an effective way to allocate resources or capabilities. So given these two comments on scope and effects, I'd like to focus in, for the second part of my comments, on economic hybrid warfare or economic hybrid initiatives. And so I think that some of these perspectives we've discussed today include the negative sides of economic coercion or economic warfare. But I think it's also important to discuss economic inducements and economic positive developments and to understand how that can shape and change the modern operating environment. And so I'd like to present to the panel a question perhaps. Within Bangladesh, how do we understand economic inducements? Is there a national mechanism or a national security element that understands and tries to analyze the effects, whether political or security, that may be a result of some of these types of operations? Thank you.
Thank you, Merlin. Like all of our roundtables, we have our young students from the university. Our last question, I'll go back to them to ask their question. Please introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Thank you. Good morning. I am Nisha Tanjum Shemanti from Dhaka University. I am studying Peace and Conflict Studies, 4th year. as it's very relevant to our academics, I have a question like when you were talking about hybrid war, mentioned disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressure, and the less trust between government and its people. So is it indicate third world or developing country are more in risk in hybrid war? And another one, we know any war changes the world polarity. Hybrid war you mentioned is multi-dimensional. Is there any chance when in any hybrid war the world polarity will change drastically? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Okay, please, we are about to finish, so please ask a short question.
Right, sir. I'm Khairul Hasan, a retired colonel of Bangladesh Army. At the outset, I thank and congratulate all the panel speakers and the moderator for their excellent deliberations, which have educated us. My question will be to Mr. Shafkat Munir, who has so eloquently explained to us the domains, tools, and techniques of hybrid war. Mr. Munir, as you know, as you have said, one of the tools to achieve success in a hybrid war is to exploit the schisms that exist in the society. We all know that Bangladesh population, despite its homogeneity, have a big schism that keeps the society widely divided into two distinctly opposing camps. The enmity between them is phenomenal and seems eternal. This schism shadows all other schisms of our society. How vulnerable do you think we are in case of a possible or already ongoing hybrid war, particularly on this point? And lastly, I would like to thank Ms. Aisha Kabir for her excellent question, which is my question also. I hope the answers to her question will educate me equally, if not more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any last minute thoughts before we go back to our panelists? Yes, please. Would you also please introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I am Mohammad Sanwar Hussain, SP Operation Anti-Terrorism Unit.
Okay.
So I just want to share something on police point of view.
Yes.
As we deal with the domestic issues. When we deal with terrorism, then we have to work on cyber issues also. We also work on cyber security. So we have a big cyber patrolling team. They are working for 24 hours. Each and every morning, they submit their 24 hours report. So what happened in our country now, that when the terrorism are now under control, so the people who think about this in Bangladesh or outside of Bangladesh, they are very much active in the online. We found that if anything happened in our country, suppose political or development or financial or something, the terrorists are using all the things from their side, and they're using that kind of thing as propaganda to hit the country. Maybe something coming from outside as a political point of view, but in maximum cases we found that the terrorists are doing the things, and they're using the graphical data and graphical presentations of that kind of thing. So my observation is that to confront that, I mean, hybrid warfare, we must need a doctrine that how we face this kind of thing. And there should be two ways. Number one is hard approach, and one is soft approach. So what we are doing now, we are facing that kind of narratives by using some counter narratives, and other ways we're using the legal issues, and we are removing the links. We're counting the links, how many shares, where from it's coming, who are doing that. So we're using our capacity, I mean cyber capacity. We're using our stakeholders who are using this kind of, I mean promoting this kind of thing. And in other ways, we are using some non-government, I mean, organization to produce that kind of narrative, so that we the people, we police or government are not saying that kind of thing. We are using the public or any intellectuals to say that kind of thing. So that's all about from our side. So I think the hybrid warfare is mostly now, I mean, against the people, to allure them to the terrorism and to allure them to think about the process of the government, something like that. So this could be more vulnerable in the future. So this is the time to prepare for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your very pertinent comment and question, both. So I thank you for your wonderful and excellent questions and your thoughts. I shall now go back to our panel, and we'll start with General Zahir.
I want to bring in some things that we have not discussed much. It's not that we are not good at prosecuting hybrid warfare. I think much has advanced in that. But I think we have not given much thought as to how to end this war and how to get out of this war. And as we said, that's how this hybrid wars, as we see, that has been in Palestine, then Syria, Iraq, Libya, and now in Ukraine, and there are many other parts of the world. See, these are protected. And there is no site for any solution to these problems. So I think there is a lot to be done, a lot for the academics and others to really give a sort of model as to how this hybrid war can be brought to an end, really. The glaring thing is that United Nations is very much ineffective in hybrid scenario and hybrid war. As we see that they are ineffective in Syria, they are ineffective in Iraq, they are ineffective in Ukraine, and this is I think a weakness, I would say, of the global community, that we cannot come together. When it comes to big powers, I think United Nations is zero. I was a part of United Nations, and I have seen it from within, and I think United Nations become helpless when the big powers are involved in such warfare. Again, my comment is that it will be a little blunt, but I think this hybrid warfare, or the fifth generation warfare, or fourth generation warfare, what we say, these are the creation of the big powers, or at least that can be blamed for fanning the flames in potential areas to create hybrid warfares. And this is to their national interest and national security interest, and sometimes also of economic interest. And we have not really thought about what happens when nations get allured by big powers to engage in hybrid warfares. Like, for example, what is happening to Ukraine. You see, the country is being destroyed, and if this continues for a few more, it will be going back to its Stone Age. And as Iraq has gone to, as Syria has gone to, as Libya has gone to. So who is going to reconstruct these countries? Who is going to reconstruct these societies? We don't have an answer for these things. Coming back to you see, after the end of Cold War, so it was unipolarity. When we say unipolarity, it is the Western club, really. So where you see USA, there you see Western Europe. There you see Canada. There you see Australia. So that is in one side. The world now has, like the Russian club, the Chinese club, and then now the Indian club. So the club surrounding these countries. And multipolarity is being allowed as long as it is benign and it is of the interest to the Western club. When the other multipolarity, you see, it wants to grow and it comes in conflict or in tension with the ethos and with the ideology and with the concepts that the Western espouse, then there is a clash, and that's what you see the run happening in Ukraine now. So I think how to really end. The only question is if world redefines interest once again. If world defines, if in the security realm or if interest, what is interest? What is national interest? If that is defined, a national interest is not a national interest if it harms some others. And if it is not a global interest, it's not a common interest for others. If we can become that benign, I think then we can have a way to get out of this sort of conflicts. And I don't know whether we are at all willing to do that. Thank you very much.
Zay, thank you very much. I shall now go to Shafkat for his last comments or an answer to the questions posed to him.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll first tackle the questions that have been directly posed to me. Going back to Ambassador Shamim's question about the example of metro rail. I was using the metro rail as an illustration of our overall cyber vulnerability. Because I think there is one thing I have always struggled with when we work on cybersecurity at BIPSS is a common perception that exists in society that because we are not, our broadband internet penetration is still lower than advanced countries, we are not cyber vulnerable. And that is not true. Whether we talk about the metro rail, whether we talk about the nuclear power plant, or all other new infrastructure that has come about, the cyber vulnerability is quite high, and we have heard from others as well, like how we can address some of those cyber vulnerabilities, because it's not just cyber attacks. We heard about the Bangladesh bank heist, but there are other new techniques which have developed by which you can render a platform unusable through cyber attack. Going to the point about mega projects, or I think my friend Merlin very rightly pointed out about economic inducements. This is a major challenge, not just for us, but for all societies. And I think the onus is on the country which is taking the loan. The onus is on the country which is implementing the mega projects, because if you are vulnerable to corruption, if you don't have right practices in place, then others will always try to exploit you. So rather than blaming the adversary, we need to plug our own gaps first. And I think the broader question that many people have raised about based on the point that I made about the schism that exists in our society, I think that's a fundamental question. As a society, we are perhaps one of the most homogeneous in the world after the Koreas, but the reality of the day is that we remain bitterly divided. And we cannot agree on some fundamental principles that govern our state. We cannot agree on what our threats are. We cannot agree on what our ideals and values are. So unless those questions are addressed, unless those gaps are plugged, we will always be vulnerable to attack and exploitation. I believe this is the first ever seminar, roundtable, workshop on hybrid war ever to take place in Bangladesh, if I'm not wrong. So to answer Ms. Aisha Kabir's question, we will continue to work on this subject at BIPSS. As you know, we are working quite a lot on disinformation and fake news. We're about to start a large countrywide project. But this is an area that we will continue to work on, because I am of the strong belief that we need to understand these threats. I also think, going back to Tanvir's point about National Security Council and structures and decision making, we also have to radically reimagine our military education and training. Because the threats on which we are educating our next generation of officers are still pretty much based on the threats we were talking about 30 or 40 years ago. We have to completely radically reimagine how we look at the concept of threats, how we look at responses, and how we look at our doctrine as well. I'm very heartened that our colleague from Anti-Terrorism Unit from Bangladesh Police has brought about the issue of cyber radicalization. As you know, I mean, I work on this issue for many years. This is an area where we have to spend a lot more energy. We have to spend a lot more resources in upping our defenses against online radicalization, because if we are able to curtail the activities of terrorists on terra firma, they are going to operate more and more in cyberspace, and that's where we need to be very careful about. And I think we also need to look at how we design our doctrine when it comes to hybrid threats as well, because I think former Foreign Secretary Mr. Tawhid Hussain has talked about some of the tools that Myanmar has employed. We are not classifying them as hybrid threats yet, but we have to look at our doctrine and to see how we can look into some of these threats and whether we are already the victim of a hybrid attack. And ultimately, I think I would like to end by quoting Farid Zakaria, who had once said that the ultimate counterterrorism tool, and this can be applicable for other hybrid threats as well, is social resilience. If we are not terrorized, they do not win. Thank you.
But a very pertinent question posed by our police colleague is that about a hybrid doctrine, both offensive and defensive for Bangladesh. We don't have one at the moment. And this is a key takeaway from the discussion, that Bangladesh needs to develop its hybrid doctrine, and it is not the military's job. It's a multi-sectoral input that has to go into it, because everybody is a warrior here. Zaid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll straightway go into the questions first, and then if we have time, maybe some brief comment. The question that came from one of our students here, if I understood it correctly, it was third world is the third world more at risk on hybrid warfare, and will the world polarity change? Now, in the literature of hybrid warfare, there is, of course, a matrix which you can find, and NATO also uses some matrix to sort of assess a country's vulnerability to hybrid threats. So if you want, I can also share it with you, but it doesn't sort of define the countries in terms of third world, first world. The vulnerability could be from anything, as we have seen. The most powerful nation in the world also had some social divisions and attacks on their parliaments. So this is not completely related to these, the order in which we sort of put the countries in global ranking. It is more about the, as Shafkat was saying in his last comment, that social resilience, how much resilient is the society, because at the heart of the hybrid warfare is attack on the social cohesion, mind, cognitive domain. So to bring a strategic effect that will incite the population either against the existing government or towards another external government. So that is one thing. And the other question, probably polarity change will not be an issue of hybrid warfare. It probably has its root, change of polarity has a much more deeper root on other geostrategic sort of priorities. So you can consider hybrid warfare in the womb of fifth generation warfare, which will eventually evolve in some day, and we'll no more talk about this as a hybrid warfare. We'll probably invent another name. So that's one area. The question, the comments about Marlin. Yes, that is exactly the sort of defining the scope and effect, sort of making it manageable research question. And if you have seen, I was just pointing out that we do. One of the ways to sort of limiting the scope could be what does hybrid warfare do in terms of our national security, social cohesion, and what effects it has. And that could be an area where we could sort of condense the broad idea and the conceptualization into a more focused area. Shafkat has already covered the economic inducement area. Abu Rushd, sir, your question about how to make us more homogeneous, well, and cohesive. Well, I'm optimist, but I don't think there is any country in the world which will be totally homogeneous in terms of it could be homogeneous. I mean, we are already homogeneous in terms of ethnicity, but in terms of opinion, it is never possible. That is why the free will exists. But what we can do is, despite our, and that free will probably gets more influenced by the political stimuli. So what probably is manageable is to shrink that division. Your other question regarding whether religious incitement could be, yes, that is the oldest form of conducting or disrupting social cohesion, and that surely is a toolkit for anyone who is trying to wage a hybrid warfare against our country. Our good friend Aisha Kabir, and definitely that is a day-to-day challenge for the people in the media, and I don't see an immediate solution to that. But I do have a suggestion. I watch France 24, which is another media channel, and what they have is a very unique program that they will pick up the best trend, highest trend news, and fact check that one. And that is done with a very precise methodology, where they would sort of take the picture and show you the metadata and then trace back, and this is all in the TV. So the fact check of that level probably immunes that particular channel to sort of to become so vulnerable into sort of becoming a tool or pawn for others' hybrid warfare campaign. Tanveer, I think I have no comments. You have already covered that much. For Tawhid sir, I will just simply add, yes, to 21st, I will probably extend your description of Bangladesh Liberation War being hybrid, not up to the end of September, probably even up to the first week of, or second week of November. Till in the 21st November when that troops started crossing the border. So that would be
started crossing the border in September.
Actually, as per the UN General Assembly's and the Security Council's speech by the foreign secretaries, it happened on 21st of November. That is why we have the Armed Forces Day. And then it was stopped, and they were asked to remain put till 4th of December, 3rd of December, so that a formal declaration happens. So that was all for Shamim sir, Excellency. Sir, I think, and this I don't want to be controversial here, but just because you have highlighted a very particular concrete example, and there were many, but let me just put another very contemporary and a very sort of a burning example, and which also gives some room for pondering. Consider the Nord Stream 2 incident in the Baltic. Nobody is blamed. Even the European Union could not blame the Russians. They have no evidence.
What should Russia do it?
Yeah, so that's and the Russia could not also blame America, despite the fact that Americans also, there are audio or sort of open speech that this will be stopped. But the fact is, the act has happened, and this is only possible through asymmetric. There are two theories. One is, of course, underwater drones have gone and then plugged in something and exploded. The other one is, of course, from divers. But the fact is, it has happened. Now, what is the effect? On the second day, on the very next day, Germany announced a 200 billion euros package to alleviate the sufferings due to the price hike of the that was caused because of the Nord Stream 2 attack. And there was also a huge upheaval in the energy market. So whoever, you can find out whoever is the beneficiary, but this is a perfect sort of good example of how this needs to be conducted. If anybody has and definitely somebody has conducted, but we don't know. even the most powerful countries do not know, and they could not put in attribution to anyone. So the plausible deniability has remained. So this is a very perfect example, even in the middle of all the sensors being focused, satellites being focused there. So with yeah, I mean, gazing is allowed, but in our own spaces, not. So that would be my sort of a very classic example of this thing. But one thing I want to re-emphasize that, and what, sir, you have said, I mean, traveling from first generation warfare to second generation, third generation, fifth generation. Actually, what it brings down is that, you know, the fact that if I talk from a point of view as warrior from military science, the ultimate battle space is actually the mind. And with that, I will end my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, our panelists were excellent in giving responses to your questions and comments. We have now come to the end of our today's deliberation on this very important topic. Before I go to my co-host Zafar Sobhan, editor of Dhaka Tribune, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank him, because as you know, BIPSS normally partners with the newspaper in conducting seminars and roundtables on key strategic issues. Pre-COVID, we partnered with Daily Star for a year. And post-COVID, when we started again, we partnered with Zafar Sobhan's newspaper, the Dhaka Tribune, for 1 year. And this is our last roundtable together with Dhaka Tribune. Next year, we'll also go to another newspaper to partner with them. So Zafar, you've been an excellent partner. Thank you very much. And for the last comments, I go back to you again.
Thank you so much. We have also enjoyed our partnership with BIPSS, and I really feel that I think it's been, has it been more than 12? Because I think we may have started in 2020. Monthly roundtables, which we have convened together, have been a really valuable addition to the discourse here surrounding strategic affairs. And I think in many ways, a lot of the subjects we have touched upon and discussed and given a platform to are subjects which are sorely under discussed in Bangladesh. In fact, this final roundtable we're doing today is a good example of that. If I'm not wrong, as Shafkat has mentioned, this is probably the first discussion on hybrid war to have ever taken place here in Bangladesh. And I think it also shines a light on the fact that there are so many subjects where we really do need to discuss far more than we are doing. So we've really appreciated this opportunity to part with you, and I know BIPSS will continue to provide these kinds of platforms. Dhaka Tribune is also, in our own way, trying to do something similar. For me, this discussion has been a real eye-opener. I'm not sure how it is for many of the other participants here, but I knew very little about hybrid war as a concept before I sat down here, and I've learned a great deal in the last 2 hours, for which I thank our panelists, and I also thank the participants, many of whom who've raised very important and interesting points, which has helped shine a light on this subject. My concluding thoughts on this is that it seems to me that at some level hybrid wars have perhaps always been with us, because all wars have a direct and to some extent indirect identity, and using the mind is has been said is the locus of war is something which has been perhaps practiced since ancient times when it comes to warfare. And and perhaps hybrid war, if we look at war as politics by other means, continued by other means, is almost a permanent condition. As we look around the world, we can see various examples of this even today. And I think it was Ambassador Tawhid who mentioned that right now, according to his interpretation, Bangladesh is in fact the subject of a hybrid war. with Myanmar, and that's one which has been brought to our attention, and maybe the ultimate hybrid war would be ones we're not even aware of, because part of the characteristics of a hybrid war are the clandestine nature of it and the fact that it is being fought on many fronts, some which are apparent to the naked eye and many which are not, which are only apparent to experts or those who are very knowledgeable about the area. I think what has come through very clearly for me in today's discussion is that today, in the 21st century, in 2023, the dangers of hybrid war are far greater than they have been in the past, and this is, as other people have mentioned, because we live in these technologically advanced times where cyber warfare and other technological advancements make the waging of hybrid war, make the waging of multimodal war far more devastating than perhaps would have been possible a century ago or even several decades ago. And that's why we have to be absolutely alive to the vulnerabilities, and which then brings us to, or brings me to, the issue of what does this mean for Bangladesh. And I think, again, what we have learned is that Bangladesh is extraordinarily vulnerable to the to hybrid wars and the impact it could have upon us. Not to say that other countries are not vulnerable, but here our focus, being here in Bangladesh, is always to be how do these subjects affect us individually, as a society, as a nation. And the question then is, given this vulnerability, what kind of preparation have we taken as a nation? Are we focusing sufficiently to combat this vulnerability, to build up our strength, to make sure that given the terrain of hybrid war, that Bangladesh is amply protected? And I think regrettably what has come through from this discussion is we have a long way to go. So again, it's important to raise these issues, but I think the real takeaway from me is that there's so much work to be done, and Bangladesh needs to be extraordinarily alive to this vulnerability. And I'd like to conclude by talking about there are many areas of vulnerabilities, as Shafkat has mentioned, as we move to a more digital, a more cyber connected world, be it the metro rail, be it other elements of governance, be it other elements of how we organize our society, the vulnerability is just going to grow. But even beyond the technological vulnerability, I think, in a number of speakers, including the panelists, have mentioned this, the real vulnerability we have here in Bangladesh, which I think is in danger of exploitation, is our lack of unity as a society. And now, of course, this is not unique to Bangladesh. All countries in the world, unity is, of course, impossible to achieve, and we see deep schisms in other countries as well. We see deep schisms in the United States, in the United Kingdom. We live in a time of deep schism, it's certainly true. But I think when you unite all of our other vulnerabilities in Bangladesh with the massive divisions we have in our society, that puts us in, I wouldn't say uniquely, but I would say it puts us in an extraordinarily vulnerable position, and it's something which we need to be aware of. And given the danger of hybrid war, I think one of the things we need to think about as a society is how can we heal these divisions? How can we come up with a identity or a mindset which at least acknowledges that yes, there are divisions, acknowledges that yes, there are schisms, but where we focus on that which brings us together and allow us as a society, as a polity, as a nation to unite to the extent that we can combat, focus on and combat and overcome these threats which we face both internally and externally. And so I think that is my takeaway, and that's really what I feel that we should be focusing on. And once again, I'd like to thank BIPSS and thank all of you, because I think it's through discussions and discourses such as these that we really start to build the kind of platform which is necessary to protect Bangladesh and to really move us forward. So thank you very much.
So once again, thank you everybody for being with us today, spending your valuable time this morning on an important topic. And please join me in thanking Zafar, Sobhan, editor, Dhaka Tribune, and the panelists for their wonderful deliberations. This brings us to the close, and please join us for a cup of coffee outside. Thank you.